welcome to 5 More Minutes Podcast.
Oh my goodness. Has anyone else noticed that this month is lasting forever? I saw a funny meme today on my friend Patty Parker's Facebook. She said, you know that poem? I'll find it. Hold on. Okay, here's the poem. The poem is 30 days has September, April, June, and November. When short February's done, all the rest have 31, except for January, which has 274. I almost died when I saw it. It was so funny because I don't know about you, but this month has absolutely, it just feels never ending. Here we go. It is almost February and then it's almost March, and that means that spring break is coming, which is going to be really good. This month is going to be a big month for me because we are moving. So I know I mentioned in a previous podcast that Jessica and I bought a house on Bowen Island. So we have made the official decision. We are moving March 1st. So that is going to make the next few weeks quite busy. Good thing I have an incredible wife who is really good at packing boxes while I travel, because this week is I'm going south, not to the nice south, to the south that a big snowstorm is coming. So everyone cross your fingers, because tomorrow I am leaving and heading to Cleveland, Ohio for 2 days, and then heading to Wisconsin for 2 days, and then New Jersey for 2 days. And I know that a blizzard is a brewing in the Chicago area. And if you know anything about Chicago, the airport there is very stressful. So send good vibes to me in my travels, because there'll be people waiting for me to arrive in those lovely, lovely places. So that's winter. The other part that's really funny is I think that this might be the first podcast that we've actually figured out the mics officially. Over the Christmas holiday when I was in New Jersey, I was talking to my cousin Paul, and I'm like, one of these mics, it sounds really clear, but then the other one sounds so far away and I don't really know. So I was trying to fix that by using a second mic, but it wasn't as good quality. So Paul, he sets it up. He's like, Shelly, this mic is on backwards. I'm like, what are you talking about? And sure enough, I had installed the mic in correctly. And so up until, today, I have been using that mic backwards the entire time. So another shout out. Thank you, Paul, for saving the day again. So you'll find that all the conversations today are very, very clear because we have figured out the mics. Yeah. So that's where we are. It's January. Our interview today is with Alex Magnussen, who you're going to learn a lot about. But I was also in charge of babysitting the dogs. So Finley and Ruth make an appearance in this podcast a couple of times, and a couple of times we had to cut the podcast because they wanted to take over the interview. So I apologize for the puppy frenzy that is happening during this interview. I hope it is not too distracting. Okay, so today's podcast. This podcast is the second connected to this month's theme of Inclusion 2.0. So the video was released the first week of January, and then I interviewed Faye Brownlie for a podcast, and really good feedback on that. Thanks, everybody. She's phenomenal, isn't she? And then the video strategy for this month was the class profile or the class review, and now is the final wrap-up conversation with Alex. So Alex, I immediately thought of, because in Inclusion 2.0, the themes really that we're trying to uncover here in connection to inclusion is the conversation around diversity and identity. And if you saw Inclusion 2.0, the video image that it shows is a bubble with a whole bunch of different colored dots. And when I looked at that the first time, I was just like, wow, this mythical green student or green person is really a myth. And I think because if you think about a bubble filled with multicolored dots, that really is our world, and all of us have these pieces of who we are that creates this identity that who we are. And so when I think of that rainbow bubble, I think about our identity. And whenever I think about identity, I think of Alex, because Alex is this incredible person. I met him when I was doing my TED Talk in January 2016, and he was up right before me on stage. And so I met him, and he just like lit up the room. He's got the most incredible smile. So he lives with autism, and he does speeches about his experiences, and he talks about what it's like to have autism, and he does mention that a few times in the podcast, but he does it in a way that kind of translates his perspective to non-autistic people, but in a way that really maintains both his integrity and others. And so I really respect that, because I know that there's a lot of attempts to kind of translate people with disabilities, and sometimes it doesn't always work, or is misrepresented. So I really appreciate Alex for that, because he talks about this in the interview, of just about the importance of not just speaking for yourself, but speaking for others when they can't. And so I really appreciate that about him. So go take a look at his TED Talk. I tweeted it today, and I posted it on Instagram today, and I posted it on Facebook today. So go take a look at that, because, within 5 minutes, you will see why he is so loved by me. Okay, good morning. Here we are with my friend Alex. Alex, you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody. So I'm very excited to have Alex on my podcast. I've known you for how many years now? 3, 4? Well, since 2016.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he has made his way here from Surrey, which, if you know anything about BC, is so far away.
Well, technically about White Rock, so hour and a half away.
Yeah, it is so far away.
Yeah,
so he did the big hike to get here, and so so thank you for joining me on my podcast today,
no
Alex.
problem, my pleasure.
So I think, I could go on and on about you, but I want the world to hear from you. Like, who are you?
Well, I'm Alexander. I'm 30. Who am I? I don't know. I'm just a guy that is living life with autism and trying to make it, as typical as possible for me, and as typical for other people to realize that people with autism, we're just typical people that have a lot of quirks, and some have more quirks than others, and we just live in life.
I love your quirks.
Thank you.
They're my favorite. Can I tell the world about my favorite one of your quirks?
Of course.
So the first time I met Alex, we were doing our TED Talks together. Yeah, so you went on right before me.
Yeah.
And Maria LaRose was organizing the event.
Yeah.
And she came up to me and she's like, Shelly, Alex is before you. And here's the thing. We don't know what he's going to do, but we know he's going to spin when he gets on the stage. Yep. And I was like, good for him. And sure enough, that's exactly what you did. It was amazing. Sorry, just a little pause for barking dogs. So, so the TED Talk was incredible. And what was it? You turn left when you get on the stage?
Right to turn left.
I love that. And then you touch the T.
Yes.
On the TED Talk. Anyways, and I was just like,
you know why I did that?
Why?
Is so then it wouldn't look as weird if I was doing it for no reason. So I look at something and go, and then I turn right, and then in front of people, because people totally are like they make all sorts of comments.
I love that about you, because my slogan this year is "You Do You."
Yeah.
And part of the reason why I want you on my podcast is because you embody that. You do you, Alex, all the time, you're making it work for you. And I think that I love seeing your success.
Thank you.
So, which kind of leads me to my next question, which is, as an adult, as a 30-year-old, I see you.
Yeah.
And I see you as an individual that has tons of strengths and abilities. And so, what are some of the things that you are really good at?
What am I really good at? I'm very good at advocating for others.
Yes.
I'm very strong at that. Advocating for myself, often not so much.
That's so hard for everybody.
It's so hard. Talking about myself I find very difficult, but I find talking about others I could do forever.
Yeah.
Other people's strength, I'm able to see so many other people's strengths. It's hard to see my own, but I do think that I'm a good public speaker. I've made a career out of that, and still continuing doing that. But I have a new job at CLBC, so it's not at the front burner, it's more on the back burner.
Yeah.
Like you said, I'm really good at being me. I am, there are things about me that, are quirky and stuff, but I just kind of do me, and I want to be an example. So if somebody else wears big earmuffs, I used to wear big earmuffs and it was fine.
Yeah.
I'd walk around and, some people would make comments and stuff, but, there was this one time this little kid with autism was plugging his ears, and he said that, he didn't know what they were for of course, kids with autism are the greatest. And, he just asked, and I was like, oh, well, you know what? These are for, having, if you're sensitive to sound, which I see that you are. And he's like, oh, I would like these. And his mom was like, oh, and he's like, I want to be like Alex and have those. And,
Awesome.
So
Yeah.
it's nice to be able to be weird, but still be okay, because younger kids, they look up to you, and they need somebody to look up to that is equally as weird, if not more weird.
Yeah, totally. Well, and for them to see that it's okay.
And it's fine.
It's okay
weird
to have
is
that
totally
support.
Fine.
Yeah.
As long as you're not hurting yourself or others,
Yeah.
be you.
Yeah. That's so true. It's almost like, as long as you can, like, not be oppressive, let's just be ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I guess, like, I've heard some of your stories growing up, and I'll ask you about those in a second, but I feel like there was a shift for you that really, like, was a moment when you kind of realized that you had these strengths and could utilize these strengths. And so I'm wondering, like, what helped you see that you could harness your abilities to, like, make it in the world and be successful?
It took a really long time. It took a really long time because it's just, when you're told, when you're a child and stuff, that you can't do this and you can't do that, or, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that, even if it's stimming, even if it's turning right to turn left, or what have you, so your confidence, because a lot of the things you do is, technically weird and stuff like that. So people get, really hung up about that. So, your confidence goes, well, maybe I'm just too weird to do this, or I don't have the ability to do it, I shouldn't do it. Where it really was a lot of learning for me, because I knew me and I thought that everyone was like me. So I would be like, well, why can't you do what I do, and why don't you do what I don't do, and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So it was really when I was around 25, I would ask people all around me, like, why, like typical people, I would go, why are you doing this? And why are you doing that? And why don't you do this? And why don't you do that? And they're like, oh, well, because I don't have autism. So it was really interesting, because people are so interested in people with autism. And I've often said that we are just as confused about you as we are, or you are about me.
Yeah.
It's like,
that is so true.
Because I have no idea what it's like to be typical. I've never not had autism.
Right.
So autism to me is quite typical, quite normal.
Totally.
Where, having autism for somebody else, because if they don't have it, is often, weird and strange, and they don't know what it feels like. And there's like 100 books about, what it's like to have autism, and, learn about autism. But I haven't found one that is like how to be a typical non-autistic person. So I'm just like,
I feel like that should be a t-shirt.
I think so.
That's amazing. Yeah, that is so true. And I think that, I don't know if, what that reminds me of is, I think it was a couple months ago, there was a play at UBC. It was called King Arthur, and it was written and produced by an individual with Down syndrome.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, incredible.
That's really
incredible.
Great.
I have a secret, I have a secret goal. I guess it's not so secret anymore. I want to get this guy on my podcast. But what I found was amazing, and I see a lot of like the media out there, like even shows like Born This Way. Do you know what I mean? Like these shows that are, showing examples of people with disabilities, but in all of the examples they're basically translating the disabled world for people who don't have disabilities, right?
Then it's the are they doing a good job about that?
Well, and then
'cause that's the thing.
Well, and that's the thing. And what I got from this King Arthur play was that they didn't do that. You know what I mean? Like this play was about this individual in the world and his interpretation of King Arthur, and it wasn't translated. Okay. And so a lot of people that I went to, they were just like, I don't get it. And I'm like, I think that's the point. You know what I mean? Like, it's not meant to be translated into the non-disabled world, because that's exactly what we do to them all the time, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so I really want to get him on the podcast, because I think that whole concept of let's look at Alex and try and make sense out of Alex for people who aren't Alex, as opposed to let's look at people who aren't Alex and make them make sense to you, right?
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, we're trying to make the people without disabilities, or people with disabilities, conform to the people without.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's, you, like for me, and watching other people with disabilities and stuff, it's, I love the individuality, but I think there's something to be said about being typical.
Yeah. Being
typical is almost like a rite of passage, in the sense where you are blended in.
Yeah.
And where I think there's can be a beautiful mix of typical and non-typical, and strange and non-strange. I think it can be marinated together a lot more, so then the strange isn't so strange and the normal isn't so normal. Where there's a balance between that. And because I want to, my goal is to be as typical as possible, in the sense, with still my autistic flair showing, but not, I don't want it to be able to hinder me. I just want it to be able to enhance my world.
Right. Okay, so this is actually a nice segue to my next question, which is, so this podcast is connected to my YouTube channel, which is really connected to the video Inclusion 2.0. Mm-hmm. And so you saw both of the videos, both the evolution of inclusion and Inclusion 2.0. And so if you think about that first video with the dots, how did that connect to your life growing up?
Oh, well, that was the evolution of the whole thing was basically my life for forever, in stages of my life. There was, all 4 stages, I believe. It was 4 stages.
Yep.
There was segregation, there was integration, there's, I now have a lot of inclusion, which is really great.
Yeah.
But, it depending on the situation is depending on where I am on the spectrum of inclusion. Yeah. And I find that it changes from place to place. And like growing up in elementary school, I was very much in the either the segregated or the integrated, where I would be off to the side, and the special kids would be off to the side, and we would learn what we were learning, and then the rest of them, we would watch. I would watch, just kind of like, what are they doing? What are they doing that I'm not doing? And it wasn't any more interesting, but it was that mystery that was so interesting. They obviously they were doing work, and we were too, but it was definitely something that I was missing, being still in the same classroom. And then when I was still in elementary school, there would be a separate classroom and stuff that we would go to one-on-one, which I really didn't like, because the whole time I was just like, well, what is everyone else doing?
Yeah.
What is everyone else doing?
It's like that FOMO slogan.
Yeah. It was just like, and, the truth be told, they're not doing anything more than what they were doing when I was looking at them. But it was that mystery of what are they doing?
Yeah. So, which is in itself distracting.
Very distracting. So I really didn't learn anything.
Right.
Where I was, supposed to learn, Math and writing and, reading and stuff like that. But I didn't learn really any of that.
Yeah.
It wasn't until MSN came out that I really learned how and wanted to learn how to read and write and type.
Yeah.
Because, and then, in...
Oh, Finley has something to say. He's adding.
Thank you, Finley.
You know, it's so funny because MSN, or, you know, what we could now say is Facebook or
Yeah.
Twitter and all the things
yeah.
is really being a motivator for a lot of kids to communicate.
Oh yeah. I remember when texting first came when I first was introduced to texting, I was so interested in it, and it's you know, a lot of people say that it's you know, very isolating for people, but for people on the spectrum, you know, it's a way to not have to look at someone and still be able to communicate just as effectively.
Absolutely.
It's so annoying.
Our puppies are attacking both of us during this podcast. Yes. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the second video kind of shifts away from that whole idea. And I think what you're, you know, I'm listening to you talk, and I'm thinking about, like, what does this even typical mean? And, like, to me, typical is the green, right? This idea, this assumption that there's these green people walking around everywhere, you know? Yeah. And then there's these people who are different. Right. And so part of the idea of inclusion is just starting to acknowledge that what is typical? You know what I mean? Like, what does that even mean?
It's so interesting because the more I, you know, learn about the quote unquote typical world is the more that I know that it's not that black and white, or in this case green.
Yeah.
It's you know, you got people that are quote unquote typical that have had very traumatic lives that you know, mold them into who they are. And if you really get into that, you know, somebody could have severe anxiety, you know, somebody could be severely depressed, suicidal, all of these things where it's, you know, quote unquote not typical, but everybody is struggling with something.
Everyone has a story. Yeah.
Everybody has a really interesting story. So I think that just because, you know, mine is diagnosed and mine is, you know, out there for people to see, doesn't mean that the person, you know, anyone else is not struggling with something and have not quite a disability, I wouldn't say, because not everyone has a disability of sorts, but everybody has something. Everyone has a story that molds them, and everybody should be different colors, I think, because everyone is like you even twins, you know, like I would say that they're even, you know, they have obviously very similar and stuff like that, but you know, if one had a traumatic event and one didn't, then they're different.
Oh,
you know?
For sure.
So
yeah. And experiences and how they make
good,
up who
bad,
they are.
or whatever, you know, will mold that person.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I think, you know, if I think about my life in the world, the people who I'm interacting with, like, the world is not homogenous. The world is not the same. You know what I mean? So if we look at the conditions of school attempting to mimic the conditions of life that we have to negotiate, it makes sense that the diversity of the world would reflect in our classrooms, which just isn't necessarily the case.
No, it's not the case. Yeah. The school is very much you need to learn this, and if you don't, you fail.
Right.
And when you get out of school, I know, like, for me, I was always told that, you know, you're not going to have a calculator everywhere you go.
Right.
Well, joke's on them. We all have phones that have
right in our pocket.
Right in our
totally.
pockets.
Yeah,
you know, I think if your kid can type, can read, can, you know, do basic math, learn to use a calculator, I think that they're winning in life.
Totally.
They can get by.
They totally can.
They can get a job.
Yeah.
They can, you know, communicate with others, you know, whether they're verbal or not, you know, being able to communicate through typing, through a communication app, you know, that is a success for life. That's a basis.
Yeah.
And then whatever else is just gravy.
This is bonus. Totally.
Totally.
So if you think, because I mean, you know, some of the stories that you share, and I encourage you all to watch Alex's TED Talk for sure, because it's one of my faves.
Thank you.
But if you think about if you go back to the moment in your childhood that you the question I'm thinking is, like, if you could go back to the moment in your childhood that you struggled, if you can think of a moment, like, whenever I think of that,
many.
Yeah, totally. I always think of grade 7. Grade 7 for me was like
grade 9 for me.
Grade 9.
Yeah.
So thinking about grade 9, if you could go back and have a pep talk with yourself in grade 9, what would you say to them?
Oh, that would be interesting. Well, I would say that, use your words, and because I wasn't the most communicative.
Yeah.
I certainly wasn't talking about feelings, or I could never I get my point across, but
Yeah.
it was nothing much else.
Yeah.
But I would say, use your power of voice, use the power of language to, one, make yourself better, and two, to make other people better as well. Advocate for your friends around you that you see that is the injustice of special education. Use the power of language to educate people on yourself. And also, I would say, you're going to turn out okay. You're really going to be okay. And here, you're going to struggle, but the power of language is something that you will have forever, and you should use forever.
Yeah. So now I want you to think about your best year. Your best year.
Grade 11.
Grade 11? Okay, so what happened that year that was different and made it the best?
Well, I had an EA that year, which was really nice, and she was around. She went to was in the same school as me in grade 7 to grade 12, really. So she saw what I was doing, and she saw the potential in me, and she saw that if I had some extra help that was very individualized to me, what's the worst that could happen? Where I was a hard person, I was my meltdowns were big and extravagant. And my communication skills were not there. A lot of things, kind of typical, for people. And but it was that, okay, what is going on in this situation that is making him behave in this way, good or bad, and then this way, good or bad? What can we do to change that? So it was, I had a lot of energy. I still have a lot of energy. I do about 20 to 30,000 steps on my Fitbit every day.
Good for you.
So what does Alex need to do to be able to be calm in his own body? And that was run the track. I would run the track, and I would get time, so she knew that I would come back to her. And if she knew if I was gone, I was gone forever. And individualizing it for somebody doesn't have to be extravagant. Just little changes, little things, more breaks, less sitting. I don't know. All that kind of stuff. To really help somebody be able to concentrate and grow as a person.
And so if you were to kind of look back at your schooling kind of career altogether, what do you think, what do you wish would have happened that didn't?
If it was individualized, I know that I would have been better academically. And I know that I would have gotten more out of school, and people would have been able to see my potential, where my potential at that back then was very low. It was, all right, let's get him so he doesn't throw a desk today. So it was, that was the, that would have been a goal, right? Where now it's like, no, learning about real life and bills to pay and all this typical stuff that
all the things,
adulthood is going to smash you in the face, whether you like it or not, whether you're ready or for not.
It's coming.
It's coming.
Totally.
You're going to be an adult. So to and it's for every kid, teach them how to be an adult, teach them what to do, bills to pay. You need to look for a job. You need to keep a job. You need to dress for a job. You need to, nowadays people, you got to watch out what's on social media.
Totally.
People, your bosses will check it.
Well, Alex, I will tell you that, there's one thing for sure that I've learned from you. And I think, part of this Inclusion 2.0 idea is, rather than trying to make everyone the same, let's find out our colors. Like who are we, and how do we learn from each other? And so when I think of you, I remember that time, we went on Davie Street and we had coffee. And I remember you looked at me and you're like, Shelly, I have a story to tell, and I was just like, oh, it's so true. Because if there's anything that I've kind of learned from you, is you're so colorful. Thank you. Know what I mean? There's so many pieces of you that create this identity of who you are. And I find, you have found success in a way that isn't dulling those colors, you know? And whenever people ask me about, you know, success stories, I think about you, because I think that
thank you.
You have these strong identities that make you who you are, and you found a way to harness that. And
you got to use what you got.
You got to use what you got. And
that's all you have, you know? And, you know, if you fight the system and be like, no, I don't want this, and I don't, you know, I could say, you know, I don't want to have autism and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, or, you know, it's like, okay, how do I use my autism for good for me and good for others? And, you know, a lot of people with autism don't speak with words, you know, verbally. So it's like, okay, what do I need to do to help not only my life better, but their life better? You know, so it's, you know, and I made a career out of it, and I've done very well on it, and I'm very proud of it. And it's, you know, it gives me status in the community. It gives me confidence. It gives me purpose in life and in community. And people can know that if they want to know something about their kids or themselves, you know, I've had people ask about, well, what does this mean? You know, do you think I have autism? Or what does this mean? Do you think that my kid has autism? Or, you know, or my kid has autism and they're struggling this way. What do you think? You know, all that. So it's being a voice for people, not only for myself and stuff, is just fantastic. And
you know, something you said that stuck out to me is that you find out what you have, and you know, you go with it. You know, and you find out how you can help yourself and help others. And I think if there was one thing that I would wish for everyone in not just education but the world to see about people who are different is, you know, rather than focusing on what makes them different, being like, okay, what can we find in there that we can help people to help themselves and help others, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that for myself too, I think is my story as well. Like, it wasn't until I realized that not only that I had some strengths, but that I had contributions that really helped me to find my path. And so that is something that I definitely want the world to know about you, Alex, is, you know, I tell people the goal is not to be green. The goal is to be brighter and to learn from each other's colors. I think of you every time I say that, because you are one of the brightest people I know.
Thank you.
So is there any final thoughts you want to say to the world? Advice for people?
Just be you. And if that is weird and different, you know, be you. And, you know, don't worry about, you know, what other people think is, you know, they might be weird and you know, suppressing it and holding it in. But if they can see that, oh, you're weird too, okay, I can be, you know, my true authentic self as well. You know, it'll help others. And then it, you know, it's that pay it forward, you know, that you be nice and then pays forward, and then the person be nice and helpful. And, you know, so this one is kind of like, you be different and I'll be different. And
totally.
I'll be different and
we can be different together.
Right.
That's perfect. Well, thanks so much, Alex.
Thank you.
So I'm very lucky today because Alex has decided to join me for our question of the day. So thank you, Alex.
You're most welcome.
Because I think he actually has a really good opinion on this. And I think that this, well, you experienced this. So I think you're a better person to answer this than me. So
thank you.
Here is the email. Hi, Shelley. To refresh your memory, I was the parent with a 13-year-old son who's considered a low incident designation due his seizure disorder and significant cognitive delays. We discussed how he was in a program with other similar kids and how I felt that this was actually a perfect fit for him, given it has given him a great environment where he could focus on things that were pertinent to him, like life skills and appropriate level of academics suitable to his abilities. The environment also gave him a sense of belonging and community, as he really feels he fits in with his peer group in this setting. The school has been great by also having other typical kids come into the classroom on different occasions. I had mentioned how the situation looks like the segregation model on your slide, but actually is in fact seems to be a model that works best for my son and his friends. You pointed out that there was another term for it when used in the right context and situation, and I'm hoping you can refresh my memory. So, congregation is the term. I was relieved that you had agreed with me that for some kids like my son, the program that he is currently in could be a good option. I feel like if run the right way and set up to be inclusive in their own way, they can be an option too. Unfortunately, the school district is in the process of phasing out this program as they move closer to a full inclusion model. And although I'm sure this move is an attempt at modernization and progressing to better acceptance of kids with special needs and all kids, I feel this move will lead to the isolation model for some children, as we've experienced in the past with our son. I was wondering if you had a perspective or opinion on the closing of these programs. That's a big question.
Well, I definitely have an answer to that.
Okay, tell me what you think, Alex.
Well, first of all, I think for people with disabilities, we are a part of a natural community that we'll always be a part of lifelong.
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that your son likes that model and is comfortable with that model and is thriving on that model, I think it's fantastic. I know that I've been a part of that model, good models of it and bad models of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's I don't think that it should be taken away in the sense of, because you're taking away kids' community, where you have to if you're going to do that, you have to replace that by including them, and because they're friends, they've been friends, they've probably, I guess, been together for years and years and years. So to take them away from each other is like taking your friendship away, and it's like moving them to a new school. You wouldn't do that. Well, you wouldn't want to do that in this if you can avoid that. I would say that taking away the community, again, is taking away their friends, taking away their confidence in school and all of that. So I think that the fact that he wants to be in it and thriving in it, I think you've already answered your own question, why, in the sense of it is a good idea.
Yeah.
For some kids, I know they don't want to be in the life skills classroom or whatever the classroom is called, which is fine. Then they want to find a new community. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I think to take it away
without replacing it
with an equal community is wrong.
Yeah. And I think that this is a perfect example of how misunderstood inclusion is sometimes, because I think that sometimes someone might look at that scenario and be like, well, that's not inclusive. But right. I don't think that that's necessarily not inclusive. I think it's the criteria that makes it not inclusive. And so Alex and I were kind of talking about, if kids are sent to these programs without choice, and without any other options and not being a part of the decisions by someone else, that's absolutely segregation. But if a parent and a child themselves are communicating that they want to be there and this is who they are, I don't think that that's not inclusive, right?
That's right.
I just think that go ahead.
Like, if I can say my story in grade 12, in grade 11, I was very included in my community, which was the disability community. And I was very loved and respected and accepted with everyone, and everyone, it was all good. And then grade 12, they were like, okay, well, let's put him in normal classes and see what he does. So they put me in a normal English class, and boom, from one year being my grade 11 year being the best year I've ever had to, okay, well, he's great now. I was in a normal class with kids my own age, which was, but they had no idea who I was. Yeah. I've never been in classes with them before in my whole 12 years of being in their school. Yeah. And it was very isolating. And what I just ended up doing is I just ended up walking home because I was so overwhelmed. Yeah. The teacher didn't understand why I was there. Yeah. I had no EA support. It was absolutely just dropped in the middle of nowhere, like a brand new school, a part of the school that I've never actually been to. Right. So it was literally like being at a different school, and it was so isolating for me. And one of the things that they were instructed to do was, if I went to the life skills room, to not let me in. And which it was terrible, because it was like I would go back and walk to the classroom, and all my friends would be like, "Oh, hey, you're back," and the teachers would have to escort me out, and eventually I just was like, "Well, I'm not getting escorted out back to that classroom, so I'm just going to go home." So my grade 12 year was me walking home. Right.
And I think that's a really good example too, whereas the situation you were put in, I think, was less inclusive than your actual life skills room, because
super isolating.
There's this misunderstanding that inclusion is just place.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Just put them in the classroom.
Yeah, and they're fine.
Yeah.
And I think not that way.
And I really like what you said about that replacement of community.
Yes.
And how, and I think there's a big debate about, well, should we have a life skills program or should we have like an inclusive classroom program? And
I think for some kids, I think you need both.
And that's exactly it. Like, I don't think it has to be one or the other. And I think it actually is about a balance. And you talked about how, you have a community within the disability community and with the non-disability community.
Yeah, and, equally as strong and equally as valued in my life. And I think that it is really important to, if a kid feels like they're in a community, whether it's, the gay community, the artsy guys, the jocks, whatever their community is to not take away from their community, because it's hard to get a community. So once you have one, and to be taken away from others' well-meaning, actions, it can be and often is detrimental to that child's
and it's almost like it's not really. And I've had this conversation many, many times, and you start to realize that it's not actually the place that makes something inclusive. It's the criteria of the place that makes it inclusive. Like,
and
who decides? Yeah, who decides where kids go, and what happens when they're there? Yeah, right. And I think that the ratio between those two things could be totally different for every kid.
Agreed.
But I also think that just because kids are with their community members doesn't mean it's not inclusive.
That's right.
But I think that for a lot of people, we don't see disability as identity.
That's right.
And I think that's really problematic.
It's very much, my identity is, as much as I'm a typical guy, as I'm a guy with autism. Yeah. And to fight that, and people have their own fights within themselves. I know I did about, I have autism. Oh my goodness, this is so bad. Yeah. But if other people are going, he has autism, this is so bad, he doesn't have, he can't, he's got to be forced into some other community, that's not acceptance of me or acceptance of myself, because people preach, accept yourself. But if you don't accept them as this is their community, whether it's the disability community or another community, it's, again, if you say you can't be in this community, it means you can't be you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we could look at that how, we would never do that to people within a culture group.
No.
We would never do that with people within a race group.
Never.
And so I think, imagine your scenario where your culture is in a room and you've been taken out of it, and then you try and go back and you're not allowed. That would never happen.
Never.
And I think that it's because we don't see disability as an identity. And I think especially in education, we still see it as a deficit, which is what's problematic here. And I think in part of these conversations around inclusion, it involves space and room and time, absolutely, but it's more about finding room for everyone to have those communities and that sense of identity.
Agreed.
Well, I think that's a really good kind of response to that. If you are listening out there, I know that this is a really hot topic right now, but it's important to know that, I would never advocate to close down programs, because I think often those are the programs where things are actually working. If anything, I have a dream that we don't need them anymore. Yeah. Because
everyone's just in the same community.
Everyone just feels safe and feels like they have belonging everywhere. Yeah. But I also think that all of us need communities of identity.
Absolutely.
And so it's figuring out the balance of both, and how can we be inclusive within diverse communities, and how can we be inclusive within communities of identity? And neither of those, though, are groups of deficit. And that's where I think the problem is, because in schools, we don't organize kids by identities. We organize them by lack of things. All the kids who can't read, go over here. Yes. All the kids who can't communicate, go over here. Yeah. All the kids who can't speak English, go over here. Yeah. And that's totally different than all the people of an identity come together.
And when a community is thriving and stuff, you'll see people in the community thriving and being better. And then the people that are a bit ahead can help the people that are behind, and the behind can, all of that. And it's just a community of, friendship and acceptance of everybody.
Yeah. And I think, within the communities that I'm in, I'll never forget, in my life when I was 19, the first person I met who was gay. Mm-hmm. And there was a sense of, like you say, acceptance that I had never felt before. Yeah. And I can't ignore that. And at the same time, I think the success that I have found in my own path is because I've been a part of diverse communities. And so I think what it has really taught me, this whole kind of journey that I'm on, is how much we all need both. Yes. And how we can facilitate both of those communities in all of our schools.
Yes.
Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I told you, right? He is amazing. I just love him. He's such a great perspective on the world, and I'm really, really proud of him. He is working now for CLBC, and which is Community Living British Columbia, and just is so independent and so able and capable. And I think that without losing who he is, he's managed to navigate both the disabled and the non-disabled world, which I think takes courage and strength. So kudos to you, Alex. So I'm reflecting on our conversation, and I really took 5 big takeaways from my conversation with Alex. The first one, I have to acknowledge that he, without even noticing, aligns with my "you do you" mantra. I have to tell you, I was in Oliver this week, and one of my colleagues, Jennifer, she brought me this sweatshirt made by her friend named Mare, and it says on it "you do you" because she listened to the podcast last week. And I'm just like, it's like my first podcast swag, so I was pretty excited about that. But I think Alex just totally embodies that, and and to be yourself and you do you, and especially if you're weird, because I love the story that he told. If people see another person being weird and strange, it kind of gives them permission to also be weird and strange. And that qualifier of, as long as you're not harming yourself or others, like, be yourself. And and for all of you listening who don't think you're weird or strange, like, really reach inside, like, harness that inner weirdness, because it's very freeing. And it's a little bit like the spice of life and the twist of lime in a lot of ways. One thing that I really appreciate about my wife is that she's super weird, but I'm also super weird, and so it gives us we have opportunities to be weird together, and it's just fun. So you find your weirdness, people, because you know what, it's good for you. Number 2, I think Alex is a really, really good example of someone who needs support, right? Like, he talks about his experience in school and life, and Alex needs support. Inclusion needs support, and Alex needed an EA, and inclusion needs EAs. And I it's so important to me that, inclusion does require these things. There's been an expectation that inclusion needs to happen without these things. And I know that we're kind of going through this crisis right now of not having enough supports, but it's really important to know that we do need supports, and we do need to advocate for those things. But there's also a lot of supports that we have been advocating for that aren't as optimal as they could be. And so, how I kind of like to think about it was, Alex talks about his experience in grade 11 and why it was so successful for him. Well, it was partly because he had an EA, but it wasn't just the EA. Alex has had many EAs in his lifetime. What made it different for this particular person was that, this person responded to what he needed. Alex has so many abilities that were hiding behind his behavior when he was a student, and it was finding his strength and responding to him, and his strengths is what helped him, not trying to change him. And that is what made that EA supportive, because the people in themselves are not the supports, but what they do can be very supportive. And so there's a lot of people out there who do this intuitively, and most of them are EAs. So if you don't know what to do, go talk to your educational assistants and your support teachers, because this is also not something we have to figure out on our own. When I was in Oliver, as I mentioned the other day, there was 7 of us kind of all sitting around the table talking about this kid and being like, what is his strengths? What does he do? And trying to figure this out together, because sometimes it takes a conversation. It takes more than one person, because sometimes kids are puzzles, but I think that's part of our role, is to figure that out, but also to know that part of figuring that out doesn't mean to change them. And I love that part about Alex, because part of his advocacy is exactly that, is making sure that we're not losing him in the process. The third takeaway, programs. This is a big one. It's a can of worms. The more people I talk to and the more that I'm reading, what I'm learning more and more is that when you're actually looking at programs for kids with disabilities, whether it's in the world or in school, it's often not the program themselves that are the problem, but how they're created, supported, and how they operate. If kids are sent in a place against their will, or without choice, or without supports, or have no other options, like that's not inclusive. And so part of the work that we're trying to figure out here is, well, what is the criteria? Because if it's not space, how do we know when something's being inclusive or not? Because I can think of, just the story that I shared with you on here that Alex and I responded to. this parent was describing a setting that was very inclusive to his son, but from the outside it looked segregative. And so I think we need to somehow come together on what makes a setting inclusive or not. And so just some questions that Alex and I were kind of throwing around, like, is it really a choice, or is this setting or program a last resort, or even like, the only option, because that's not a choice either. I know there was a lot of kids that I've worked with in my past where it wasn't even a question whether they went into the program, and that's where I think it gets problematic is, when you're actually offered a choice, and you choose for your kid to be with their like peers, I don't think that we have a right as non-disabled people and as parents of non-disabled children to really make that choice. However, if those parents are in a situation where that's the only option that they will receive supports, well, that's not a choice either. So I think this is not a black and white issue for sure, but I think choice plays a role. The other thing I think about programs is, are they purposeful? Like, what's happening in the programs? Are kids growing? Are they learning? Are they receiving support in personal, social, and intellectual ways? And who has a say in deciding what those things are? I think that there's a lot of conversations around the world right now about what knowledge is and what it means to differ from different perspectives, and who has a say, like who decides this. And I see examples like when I interviewed in the early podcast with Kim Ondrick, she has meetings with her community's members and her parents to say, where do we want this program to go? Like, it's very democratic, and that's very, very different than many programs that are already pre-created and assume that kids kind of get streamed into these programs without, first of all, their buy-in, but also their say. And so I think that definitely plays a role too, like, how are they developed and how do they exist? But I think the most important thing here is that I don't think it needs to be an either or. I think actually it needs to not be an either or. All students, whether they have disabilities or not, I think need both of safe and supportive communities of both diversity and identity. And we have no problem doing this with other kids. And so I don't think it's bad that kids with disabilities hang out together or in classes together. But I think we need to ask questions if that's the only place where they feel safe and supportive, because that's not inclusive either. So I think that this is, a very fine balance of, if there's no place where kids feel safe, we need to find one, and then we really need to grow that. Because I think, the success that I see in Alex is because he feels so safe and supportive in so many communities, and that's really what's been able to help him be so successful. And for a lot of kids, there really sometimes isn't any space. And so start with one, but make sure we grow, because I think as soon as we stop moving, we're not being inclusive anymore. Number 4, community. The disability community is a community, and we cannot take that away without replacing it with something else. Otherwise, I think what's going to happen is we're going to find ourselves in a big mess of integration, which is exactly what schools are dealing with right now. And all of us are really trying to scramble to figure out what to do. If there is no place where kids feel safe and supported, it's okay to find a place, and if that place happens to be with other kids with disabilities, but they're safe and other kids are safe, just start there. But it doesn't have to be all day. It can be 10 minutes. But I think what's happening is we're closing down these programs in fear that they're not inclusive, and we're ending up really, really isolating some kids in some situations where both kids and teachers don't know what to do. And so I know it's not that easy, but I think we need to really start looking at the kids and the criteria for what makes inclusion possible. And again, it's the growth, it's the movement towards finding purposeful places over time. Number 5, this one's my favorite, and this is the advice that Alex said he would give to his younger self. And he says, live to make your life better for yourself and for others. Advocate against injustice. Speak up, especially when those around you don't have a voice. And I think that goes way beyond just the disability community, and connects to me and connects to many people I know. And so I think that really is, part of our role in the world and in education is, you can see injustices all the time, but it's when you say something that makes it, you start to draw on issues like equity and fairness and all of the words that we throw around a lot. But we can't do this by ourselves, and so let's support each other. Whew. That was good. We covered a lot of stuff. Like that podcast could probably divide up into 6 future podcasts. And so thank you for listening, everybody. This podcast wraps up our month, our theme of Inclusion 2.0. So stay tuned. Next week, we'll have an all new 5 more minutes video, and it's a good one. You're going to laugh. So have a good week. Stay healthy, everybody. And we'll see you. We'll see you soon.
5 More Minutes is produced by Shelley Moore and Paul Madsen. You can find 5 More Minutes on YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, Instagram, Spotify, Twitter, and on 5moreminutes.com. See you next time.